dolls in her lair, with stitches so fine, a wit so divine. Her humor is twisted as grape on the vine, attracting the strange, confessions arranged. Her life is a mix that's delightfully deranged. Rachel makes it weird.
He leaks. He always leaks. That's why he lives by himself. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of my podcast, Rachel Makes It Weird. Today I'll be talking about weird encounters with strangers, followed by an explanation about how I lost the company car. But before I begin, let me show you the before and after of my restored Pleasant Company doll Addy. Pleasant Company changed to the American Girl Doll Company when Pleasant Rowland sold the company to Mattel in the year 2000. Addy was first released in 1993, so this doll is somewhere between 25 and 37 years old. Addy represents the Civil War era, and the books about her are incredible. I highly recommend them for any age. You can see my Pleasant Company Addy next to my new American Girl doll Addy, and there are some differences. The Pleasant Company dolls have chubbier bodies and faces, and the newer dolls have more coloring in their cheeks and lips. I found this doll on Facebook Market a couple months ago, and I had to remove her wig as it looked like an animal had been chewing on it. I replaced it with the indie wig purchased from the Etsy shop Zazu Custom Dolls, which is located in Florida. I like to buy local whenever I can. It was the closest I could find to what her original hair was. I sewed up some rips in her body and tightened her limbs. For much of this episode, you'll get to watch me violently stuffing cotton into this poor doll's torso, because that was the most time-consuming part, and I didn't have as much time to sew, being down with a cold. I still have the cold, so if you hear me snuffling or coughing, I am very sorry. For the sewing I did do later in this video, I didn't film as much as I intended because the fabric was ridiculously slippery and kept shedding. I had to really focus on what I was doing. But let's get back to the main topic, which is weird encounters. The opening quote, "He leaks, he always leaks. That's why he lives by himself," is brought to you by a cashier in Walmart in New Hampshire, where we used to live. While ringing up our groceries, she stopped and stared in a most unsettling way at our package of raw chicken thighs. Josh asked her if the package was leaking, and that's when she gave her cryptic reply, "He always leaks." Who is this mysterious person who lives by himself because he leaks? We may never know, because my husband got a very creepy feeling and got out of there without bothering to ask. I, too, have had some weird encounters at that particular Walmart. One evening I was standing in line with my infant son in one arm and a jug of milk in the other. The man in line just ahead of me turned around, stared at my chest, and said, "I used to breastfeed. It's been a few months, though." The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I immediately left the line and didn't come back until I was sure that creep was gone. I didn't want him seeing where I parked and what kind of car I drove so he could follow me home. Definitely didn't want my milkshake bringing that boy to the yard. Anyway, another strange encounter at that Walmart was when I went with baby Zoe. Zoe was born with masses of black hair, and it stood straight up all over her head like she was a treasure troll. It didn't look real. Our pastor once looked at her and exclaimed, "It's a baby with a wig," until his wife shushed him. I was pushing the shopping cart, and she was in her carrier in the seat portion of the cart like she's supposed to be, and I'm pushing the cart and talking to her like I always do when I notice these two older ladies staring at me. I'm used to the weirdness of Walmart, so I ignore them, and I'm just talking away to my baby. Suddenly, both old ladies jump straight up, and one of them lets out a little scream. It's my turn to stare at her, and she blushes and says, I am so sorry. I thought you were talking to a doll until she moved and scared me half to death." Then they both came over, and I let them touch my daughter's hair because they still had some doubts about whether or not it was a wig. Zoe was a cute baby. Her hair stuck straight up until she was about 3 months old, and then it started to droop until it resembled Elvis's pompadour. A few months before that, when I was about 7 months pregnant with Zoe, I had a man chase me through the Walmart parking lot. It was winter, and I had on a huge Naugahyde coat that was lined in synthetic fur. I saw him staring at me from across the lot. He was hard to miss, with his spindly ankles poking out the bottom of his too short pants, and his long wrists poking out of his coat sleeves, and his grizzled gray beard sticking out from his face like it was afraid of it and trying to get away. I walked toward the store as fast as my swollen pregnant legs could carry me, and I hear the clop, clop, clop of his shoes, and he's walking after me, so I walk faster, and then I hear clop, 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 closer now and faster, and I look over my shoulder, and he's gaining on me. So I break into a run, and I'm inside the store, and I think I'm safe when I hear clop, 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 and he's blocking my path. He peers intensely down into my face with piercing gray eyes and says, "Excuse me, is your coat made from real fur?" The way his eyes narrow menacingly at the words "real fur" make me very happy to assure him that the coat was made from faux suede and faux fur. He launches into a long rant about the evils of animal products while I smile a tight, terrified smile and pray he doesn't notice my shoes, which are definitely leather. He doesn't, and I survive to wear faux fur another day. I sometimes wonder if the very aggressive vegan made an impression on my unborn daughter. She was a staunch vegetarian from age 7 to 12. Then she and everyone else in junior high discovered designer bags, and she decided leather might not be so bad after all. Once a relative had gifted her a Michael Kors purse, she was on a slippery slope that slid her away from animal rights and straight toward platefuls of crispy bacon. Speaking of my daughter, she is at the age where I couldn't be any less cool. At least, I hope I can't become any less cool. I might sink yet lower into her eyes. Not into her eyes, in her eyes. I might yet sink lower in her eyes. But here's hoping I won't. She heard me trying out different melodies for the podcast's theme song and offered gentle words of encouragement like, "Are you trying to embarrass yourself? No, I'm being serious. Are you? Please don't tell anyone you're my mother. You're going to get so hated on when your podcast comes out. Seriously, Mom, I'm worried about you. I don't think you understand all the hatred that is going to come your way." Unfortunately, her pearls of wisdom are wasted upon her swine mother, and I persist. Sometimes when I am withering under her scornful gaze, I want to stand up and tell her, "You don't know coolness when you see it. I was worshipped as a god by the 12-year-olds in Brazil." Okay, so maybe I wasn't worshipped as a god, but I was once sort of venerated as a saint. Okay, and so maybe not by all the 12-year-olds in Brazil, but at least to one 12-year-old for a couple days, I was kind of a big deal. Here is the thrilling tale of my brief brush with sainthood. When I was 20 years old, I and a small group of young adults went on a mission trip to Brazil for a few weeks. Sometimes it seems a little surreal to me that I used to be a missionary. It's not that I think there isn't ever a good place for missionary work. It's just ironic that I started traveling to tell people how to live and what to believe when I was still basically a lost teenager who only spoke English. I hardly knew who I was, and I knew even less about the cultures I was trying to save. At the time, though, I believed it was what I was supposed to do, and I worked hard, used all my savings, and convinced other generous, good-hearted people to sponsor me. In many ways, these trips were good learning experiences, for me at least, and I'm very grateful to the people who believed enough in me to help fund them. However, with the benefit of hindsight, I can't help but feel that all that money would have been put to better use if it had been given directly to well-established charities that were managed by people who belonged to and understood the cultures. I really didn't know what I was doing and was woefully unprepared most of the time. I hope I don't sound like I'm taking any of the support I received during my early 20s for granted. I will always be thankful for my church's generosity, but it does feel inauthentic to mention that period in my life without admitting I have some mixed feelings about it now. Anyway, back to Brazil. My mission team was a group of about 8 or 10 people, most of us in our very early 20s or late teens. Some schools invited us to speak and sing and perform skits, and afterwards we stuck around to talk to students. There was a group of little 7th grade girls at one school who stuck around to talk to me afterwards. For context, you've got to know that in the late 90s, Americans were considered a bit more cool than maybe we are now. People would just assume we lived in Hollywood and knew stars like Tom Cruise and Julia Roberts. So, despite the fact that I only owned one pair of very stinky shoes and had cut my short, crooked bangs myself, I was cool just by association. Anyway, in this group of girls was this really sweet 12-year-old girl that we'll call Kelly. She seemed the most interested in us, and I think she was the one who talked the other girls in her group into coming to a weekend retreat we were holding at a church. I noticed Kelly and her little friends spent a lot of time hanging around me, even though I didn't speak Portuguese and they didn't speak much English. Actually, it's embarrassing how much better their English was than my Portuguese. The retreat was a lot of fun. The kids went home, and Kelly said a tearful goodbye that seemed a little more intense than the situation warranted. She gave me a nice gift of an address book with a really sweet note inside that seemed, again, a little more intense and effusive than I expected, but I chalked it up to the language barrier and her age. I hugged her and the other kids goodbye and didn't think much about it until about a week later when we were getting ready to leave. One of our contacts at the church reached out to my team leader because Kelly's mother had come to them with a serious concern. I may be misunderstanding some of this because the language barrier and the way it was translated to me, but apparently Kelly had suddenly become very ill and told her mother I was like a patron saint to her and that she would surely die if I left Brazil. Her mother got scared and told the church that she didn't want me to go back to America. When all this was explained to me, I did not know what to think. I was gobsmacked. I couldn't help but feel flattered that this sweet kid thought highly of me, but I was terrified. No one could tell me how sick she was. I knew I didn't have any miraculous healing powers, and I definitely couldn't stay in the country indefinitely. Also, it seemed like some of the people in the church were suspicious that maybe I had been lying to this innocent child. I tried to explain that I hadn't said anything to make her think I was anything special, but there were definitely some raised eyebrows over the ordeal. The way it was handled did cause me to feel that I was somehow responsible for the whole situation. I was urged by my team leader to think long and hard about what I could have possibly told her to make her think I was a saint, and then I was ordered not to contact Kelly and to let the church handle it. I agreed to that because I didn't speak Portuguese and I was afraid I'd make the situation worse, so I didn't reach out, but I felt pretty terrible for not going to see her when she was sick and had been asking for me. I agonized over any little thing I'd said or done to make her build me up as a saint in her mind, but I couldn't. I wasn't even Catholic. I didn't even know that much about saints. Thankfully, Kelly made a full recovery on her own without any miraculous intervention from me, and I went back to America. Looking back, I see Kelly as an imaginative kid who happened to be at an impressionable stage when I met her. She probably picked up a virus from another kid at the retreat, and her imagination kicked into high gear and just made everything worse. Goodness knows, my imagination got me into trouble at her age and every age, so I understand. I also really wonder if maybe she'd had a fever that caused her to hallucinate. That maybe I was a saint. Whatever the reason, there were a couple days in which I was scared shitless a child would die and that it would be my fault. We were in Brazil for about a month, but before that, our team spent a few weeks in Houston volunteering with some ministries there. One ministry provided housing and care to people who were HIV positive. Some people were already in the advanced stages of AIDS, and seeing them like that was pretty intense for me. This was in the 1990s and the peak of the AIDS epidemic. I'm ashamed to say I had held some bigoted beliefs at that time. I'd been told that AIDS was a sort of judgment from God for being gay, but seeing people suffer and knowing the people, I just knew that I was wrong, that this wasn't God's judgment. This was just something really sad. There was a young mom with weeks to live who hadn't told her daughter she was dying yet. A former drug addict who had good days and bad days with his health. And Edward. Edward was a friendly, middle-aged, flamboyant gay man from Louisiana, and he was an absolute genius with needle and thread. He showed me a photo of himself in drag at a Mardi Gras parade. He had made himself the most over-the-top Marie Antoinette-style dress. It was beautifully sewn, and he was wearing an enormous wig, makeup, and jewelry to match. I had never seen anything like it. I was surprised because my knee-jerk reaction was to say, "That's cool," instead of thinking, "That's a sin," which had been drilled into my head my whole life. I'm really glad I didn't default to that and was able to admire his work. He was very kind to me and taught me how to sew a new cover for my Bible from one of his old woven shirts. I hadn't spent any time with a gay man before. I had been taught that homosexuality was a result of sin or childhood trauma, and I kept trying to imagine what Edward would be like if he were whole, like if God restored him to heterosexuality. But everything I had been taught was shaken up by the realization that I couldn't picture Edward any other way. Maybe he was who he was created to be, and I was wrong about some things. I'd really like to say right then and there I stopped holding bigoted beliefs, but I really didn't feel safe thinking outside of my narrow box at that point in my life. I didn't want to believe that being gay was wrong, but I honestly thought I had no other choice. I was afraid that if I didn't believe everything I'd been taught at my fundamentalist church, God would punish me. I did eventually get to a place where I realized that God loved me unconditionally and wasn't going to punish me for changing my beliefs, but it took a long time to get there. I will always feel grateful to Edward for his kindness. Just by being himself, he did more to dispel my ignorance than any argument ever could. Every time I looked at that colorful Bible cover made from his old shirt, another tiny crack formed in the wall that had been built around me. That was one of the best things that ever happened to me on a mission trip. One not-so-good thing that happened in Houston is that our team briefly worked with this really strange church. I don't even remember what we did with them. Maybe they had a homeless ministry. But I do remember that after one service, they had a prayer time where the pastor went around praying for people. Like many 20-year-olds, I felt confused about what I was supposed to do with my life, so I waited in the pew for the pastor to come over and pray for me. I was going to ask him to pray that God would show me what I should be doing next, but he didn't even say hello or ask my name. He stuck his finger against my forehead and started saying, "Tip her, Lord. Tip her over. Just tip her, God." He had this bleached blonde lady with him. She was wearing a lot of makeup that was settling into the creases of her skin. She moved in a detached, floaty way that was completely at odds with her physique, which was short and squat. She looked up at me through heavily mascaraed eyes and spoke in a breathy whisper. "Oh, yes, Father God, please tip her over. Please tip her over, Lord." She moved to stand behind me and extended her arms as if she wanted me to fall into them. I did not know what was going on, but I sure as hell wasn't going to answer their prayers and fall over. I dug in my heels and prayed my own silent prayer that they would go away and find another victim. The pastor pushed his finger harder against my forehead. I found myself losing my balance and wobbled to stay upright. "Tip her, Lord. Tip her. Tip her right over." The blonde lady prayed her own breathy prayers as well and began speaking in tongues. It sounded like she was saying Shikira Makura, Hakuma Matata, and other just gibberish. I dug my heels in harder, fighting the urge to stick my finger in the jerk minister's face, but it was becoming clear that they weren't going to let go of me anytime soon. They wanted to slay me in the spirit, which is kind of a niche thing you might find in some Pentecostal Christian circles. In a nutshell, to be slain in the spirit is when God knocks you out and does some work on your soul while you're unconscious. I do know a few people who say it happened to them and that it was a positive experience. They claimed they felt healed of some things that had been bothering them afterwards. Now, I can't argue with someone else's experience, but honestly, to me, it all sounds a little non-consensual and like something I'd rather avoid. And there were these pushy people pressuring me to play trust falls with them. Nope, wasn't happening. Sweating bullets, I glared at the pastor and his little helper until they backed off. They moved on to someone else, annoyed by the hardness of my heart. Whew. Well, that reminds me of another weird prayer experience in Houston. My team leader, let's call her Angie, insisted I had problems that needed divine intervention. The reason she thought so is because I got mad and said, "Damn it." The reason I got mad and said, "Damn it," is because we were at the beach and I was hangry, and my friend Paulo was throwing French fries over my head to make the seagulls dive bomb me. I was getting swarmed and the French fries kept coming, so I yelled, "Stop, damn it!" Angie looked at me with wide eyes and shook her head in sorrowing disapproval. When we got back to the place we were staying, Angie whisked me away to a darkened room. "Rachel, you've got a lot of anger in you, and we're going to get to the bottom of it," she said. "I was mad because I don't like being attacked by birds," I said, "and Paula was throwing fries at my head." "No," Angie said, "this is serious, Rachel. It's more than just the birds." I wish I'd told Angie to F off, but I was way too submissive in those days. She prayed over me a long time. She kept looking at me with wide eyes to try to glean some spiritual insight into my problems. I kept gulping because all this scrutiny was making me nervous. All that gulping meant I swallowed a lot of air. All that air meant I had to burp. I tried to hold them in, but Angie looked triumphant. She told me the burps were demons leaving my body. I told Angie my burps were just burps. She told me I was wrong. I told her I didn't think I had demons and that I had just swallowed a lot of air and that I didn't think my problems were that serious after all and I would like to go now, please. She implied crossly that God had showed her otherwise. I was lousy with demons. She got annoyed and finally gave up, but not before saying I probably had more demons to burp out and that God had to do a lot more work in me, but she was getting tired. Holy shit. I mean, I knew that time in my life was strange, but come on. Angie was awful. She was so awful for trying to make me feel like I had major problems for just having a normal reaction to having French fries thrown at my head. That really messed with me. I was basically still a kid, and she was in her late 30s, so she should have known better. Though, if she could see the force with which I stuffed Addie, she might still believe I need deliverance from anger issues. So much harm comes from people who use religion to gain power over others, knocking them down, sometimes literally, to make themselves feel important. Well, this little trek down memory lane got more intense than I intended it to, but I think that makes it more interesting, don't you? That time in my life was beautiful and exciting and messed up all at once, the very definition of weird. I think there's time for one or two more stories. Talking about 12-year-old Kelly's imagining I was a saint reminds me of when my own imagination ran away, leading me to try to save a group of hot kayakers from what I thought was certain death. Let me just take a drink of water here. I grew up in a little town in New Hampshire along the Connecticut River. The river also serves as the border between New Hampshire and Vermont. In the summer, I would walk across the Samuel Morey Bridge into Vermont to buy candy. One day, when I was about 15, I was walking back home when I saw something that froze me in my tracks. It was a group of good-looking young men climbing over the side of the bridge, preparing to jump into the water below. So, this bridge is kind of high up in the air, 35 or 40 feet from the surface of the water. I had once said I wanted to jump off the bridge myself, but my mother had firmly impressed upon me that the force of the fall would snap my neck when I hit the water. And if that didn't kill me, rocks or tree stumps below the surface would. So I see these young guys about to jump to their doom, and what do? I hurtle toward them, screaming, begging them to stop and not throw their lives away. They pause, clinging to the side of the bridge as they wait for me to arrive. It's a long walk. It's a long way to the middle of the bridge, and when I get there, I've given myself an asthma attack from running. I'm all out of breath, gasping fragments of sentences. Don't jump! Too far! My mom says. They are too beautiful to die. They must listen to me. I must save them. Please don't do it, I wheeze. You'll die. It's okay, says one especially good-looking guy with bleached blonde hair. He's on the other side of the railing, one slip away from certain death. No one is going to die. Yes, you will, I insist. My mom says the force of the fall alone will kill you. Well, I think she's wrong, he replies with a grin, because we've already done it. As you can see, we're soaking wet. I look at them. Water is indeed dripping from their manly forms. I blush and stare at the sidewalk. This is my third time jumping, he says kindly. The water is very deep. We can't even touch the bottom when we land. I look at him, and he struggles to keep a straight face. I look at the others, all hastily trying to wipe the smirks off their faces. I look again at the sidewalk beneath my feet. Oh, I say. Carry on, then. It is a long, awkward walk to the New Hampshire side of the bridge. I take a puff of my inhaler, wrap my tattered dignity tightly around me, and finish crossing the bridge. I pace myself so I don't walk too quickly or too slowly, but just the right speed for someone who is definitely not embarrassed. I look back over my shoulder once. They are all still hanging over the side of the bridge, watching me. After an excruciating length of time, I finally reach the other side. The second I do, they erupt in great big whoops of laughter and drop one by one into the water below. And nobody breaks their neck. Okay, that reminds me, just last week I did come this close to being a hero. I almost saved someone's life. So my son and I were walking our dogs through the park when we came across a group of kids standing on the edge of a pond. They were looking sadly after their ball as it was drifting away. One of the boys steps into the water after it. "Stop!" an older girl called. I think she was his sister. "You can't swim, and I can't swim, and if you drown, I'm not going to save you." I remarked that I didn't think the water is more than a couple feet deep, but there might be water snakes or an alligator. And as soon as I said that, the boy went from being knee-deep in water to neck-deep. He scrambled to find his footing, but seemed to only get himself in deeper and deeper water. He began calling for help. I handed his sister my dog and ran towards the pond. He saw this great big blonde lady lumbering toward him and very quickly learned how to swim. He made frantic dog paddling motions until his feet touched the bottom and he stood up. "It's okay," he screamed, more terrified of me than of drowning. "I'm fine." I watch as he straggles ashore. His pants fall to his knees as he collapses on the grassy bank. His friends gather round and laugh at him. "That lady was gonna save you." "Shut up," he says. Disappointed that I didn't get to be a hero, but more relieved that I didn't have to jump into a pond with snakes and a flailing child, I gather my dogs and son and go home. Oh, one more thing. I almost forgot to tell you about how I lost the company car. Well, when I was working at the group home, I often had to pick up prescriptions for clients at the pharmacy. One evening... Oh, I'm getting lost. Sorry. Okay, it was a block or two away, so half the time I walked. One evening I drove to the pharmacy and was picking up prescriptions when the phone rang. It was Josh. We had just started dating and I was Twitter-pated, so without even thinking about it, I walked back to work floating on air. I had to work overnight, so I made dinner, gave all the clients their meds, and went to bed. In the morning, I got up, needing to run more errands. I walked out to the parking lot, and there was no car. I panicked. I completely forgot I'd driven to the pharmacy and walked back. I called my boss to tell her it was gone. She called around to see if any other staff members had borrowed it, and then she called the cops. She was in the middle of filling out a police report when one of the other staff members called to say he'd seen the company car parked outside of the pharmacy. She called me back, and at first I was all, I have no idea how it got there. And then I said, "Oh," because I remembered. My boss was relieved, but was kind of irritated with me, and I spent the next couple days hearing about it from her and my other colleagues and even the clients. It seemed like everybody knew that. Even my sweet boyfriend was taken aback by my spaciness and decided he wasn't going to call me as much during work hours. That's all for now. Stay tuned, stay weird, and stay beautifully you. Until next time. Rachel makes it